Well, we are not without our truck and trailer, which is great. And we have some neighbors here, which is kind of nice. So these past few days have been very interesting. So it has been, we had like 3 days of just beautiful weather. I mean, you couldn't ask for nicer weather. Perfect 70s, decently warm. We had a little humidity on the last day, but then the temperatures have tanked. Yesterday, for example, it was snowing a little bit, 31 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit. Not ideal. I'm going to complain about it because we had such nice weather, but we knew it was coming. Even right now, it is cold, but at least there's a lovely sun. That's the nice thing about Indiana, you know, even compared to, where I grew up in Washington. In Washington, it's generally crappy all the time. It's not as cold by any means, and it doesn't rain as much as people think it does, but generally crappy. But today was a day that we got service done on the truck. Basically, if you don't know, we've been having some real bad clunking in our truck since we got it, but it's intermittent. That's the worst part about any of these issues, is that they're intermittent. It's never going to do it when you take your truck in for service. And guess what? It behaves better than it ever has. Today, oh my gosh. But we take it in, they can't replicate it, of course, and basically it's kind of a rough shift into third, rough shift out of third, and then from 4 to 3 and 3 to 2. And it's so difficult to explain these things too. We had a video of this issue. And he goes, "Are you sure it's not normal?" And I'm like, it almost feels like gaslighting, and I know it's not, but it's kind of what it feels like when you go to talk to a mechanic and they're like, "Well, it might be in your head," I'm like, "Sir, it's not psychosomatic." So, but we did have a sprayer issue. So our windshield wiper fluid was not spraying, and it is now. So I guess the hoses got disconnected, and I have no clue how that would have possibly happened. I also don't know where they reconnected them, and I didn't ask. Although something I learned was that the air filter we had installed in the truck back in Colorado when we did an oil change, if you guys recall that, the one we got actually has a little bit of, it's got some, a little bit of glue. And supposedly with these diesel engines, they require so much air for not only the engine and the turbo, but also for the DEF, or the diesel particulate filter system. That whole system requires a lot of oxygen as well. And from what he said, even just that little bit of it's like hot glue just to keep the spines together. He said, yeah, that can cause an issue. So I'm inclined to believe him. I have no reason not to believe him. He goes, yeah, but it looks, it's still clean and whatever. So that's cool. And he also reminded me to change the crankcase filter more frequently than the 90,000 mile interval, which is a good reminder. So I'm glad we went in for that. But yeah, that was just kind of embarrassing. He goes, yeah, it's not acting up right now. So hey, what can you do? And at least we documented it. That's important because we do have a warranty, and that makes me feel somewhat better, right? Probably. But now that that's done, we don't have much reason to stay here, but we will stay here at least through Saturday. I think Emma's dad is swinging through, I believe that's on Saturday. So we'll just hang out here. He's coming, south from Michigan. So as for right now, we're gonna go to the Hall of Fame here, and I'm gonna do some research because they have a wonderful library here. I also made a friend here, and, kind of chit-chatting, but I do need to do some research, and they have just some wonderful resources here, which is awesome. Also, I've been trying to see if Escape wants to put the trailers in here, because there's a whole exhibit here, the Go RVing Hall, what used to be the Go RVing Hall. They're not there anymore. And I think it would be awesome to have this as a little Escape trailer exhibit, little showroom. Why not, right? Now, if you're an RV nerd like me, this library will come as no surprise. There is so much to see and so much to appreciate, and it's great. Even if it's magazines. I mean, there is magazine after magazine after magazine, and honestly, I wish they still made these GM motorhomes. And actually, our neighbors right now are two beautiful GM motorhomes. One that was masterfully restored, another one that it's more of a racing style. I believe they gutted it. It's really quite something to look at. But Motorhome Marketplace, and it's kind of neat. This one's from 2001. And something like this, there's tons of great information and some cool photos of RVs that you may never have seen even today, or seeing them in their original condition is also something that's really neat. But you can even go back into the 50s and see some of the advertisements alone back then. They were works of art, you know, and it's actually advertisements that now I don't mind seeing, which is really quite cool, which is the opposite of how I usually feel. Ads are bothersome, to say the least, but this is kind of neat. So, trailering for health and happiness. Kind of a neat little pamphlet here, and it's so great to see how they depict trailerites, for example. And this is, you know, trailering for health and happiness. So, trailer people, they call themselves trailerites, are very strong individualists. They are extroverts, confirmed ones. They love everything in the external world, from youth to senility. They live it up. Keep one thing in mind all the time as you read this. The people you will meet in trailer life have all had homes. They were born and raised in a home. Most of them reared and educated their own children in a home, and a very high percentage of them still own houses, but live and travel in a trailer. I love that. I love the perspective. And, you know, obviously some of these were written even earlier on, where RVs and trailers were considered great housing solutions rather than, you know, an accessory or a vacation tool, if you will. And I think that's awesome. And the really cool thing is it was sort of like this really neat, accepted subculture, mostly accepted, right? Not everybody, of folks that you're a trailerite. You're not just an RVer. You're not one of those, you know, you're a trailerite. And how cool is that? And they have some great books like How to Build Trailers. Anybody who's thinking of building a trailer, who just wants to know how trailers are built, will find this book valuable, with tons of, you can see a lot of different photos and illustrations in here. It's so neat. Homes for travel and living, the history and development of the recreational vehicle and mobile home industries. And it's so fascinating to see, you know, they've got statistics and ages of husbands and wives, right? And it's like, it's so fascinating that, and how they're built and sort of, you know, as things were happening back then. It's not a retrospective. This is actually the information as it was, you know, coming out. But this book, Manufactured Insecurity, I found this one to be particularly interesting. And I think I already mentioned this a little bit. But mobile home parks and America's tenuous right to place. And it makes me think of the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that is in our Declaration of Independence, written back in 1776. And it's fascinating because I know some people think that there's a right to home, but it's not explicitly stated that we have a right to home. And even if we did have such a right, you know, what does that look like? Although courts have seemingly upheld that you do have a right to live, right? You have a right to life and life's necessities, which is fascinating. But the means, you know, what can the government take versus what must the government give is you know, it's always an interpretive practice, right? But here on page 204, it says, recognizing housing as a human right would restructure our social and political understanding of housing insecurity. This would require enacting legislation and shifting budgetary priorities, which in recent years has seemed like an unsurmountable task. But over the last century, the U.S. has made legislative shifts to ensure fundamental human rights as the needs of society have evolved. As late as 1990, we ensured the basic right for all people, including those with a disability, to enter a standard doorway and into a home. The housing measures within the Americans with Disability Act codify that right into law. As a result of this paradigm shift, we reshaped both our built environment and our understanding of that environment. Today, a wheelchair ramp and a widened doorway are part of our common building vernacular. And it's so fascinating that, you know, we can quibble over, you know, should people live in this or should they not, or where can they live in this and that. And that's a lot of what this, you know, they talk about manufactured homes, but they also talk about trailerites, RVs and such, just to touch on it, right? And it's all kind of a similar argument. It's all along the same line. But I love seeing, you know, the legal framework around these things, and it's, you know, how crazy is it that we even have to fight to just be able to live where we, you know, and I understand it's nothing's black and white, right? But, you know, seeing it outlined and explicitly stated like this, where you don't even think about the ADA having an impact on housing, but it does. And today, you know, here in 2026, it's crazy to say, this is just the norm. This is how we live. And the ADA applies to every business and every public institution. But, you know, far back as like 1989, this was not the case. Even 1990, 91, 92, you know, until things caught up. You know, our world, something so simple as a law like that really changes things, changes the way the world looks and feels and how people interact and navigate through this world. And I think it's very valuable to have resources like this. Two excerpts from this that really stood out to me. The stereotype of trailer trash is inseparable from the concept of white trash, which scholars point out is not just a classist slur, but it's also a racial epithet that marks out certain whites as a breed apart, a dysgenic race to themselves, and that was written in 1997. It's quite fascinating because there is such a stereotype, and this is not just trailers, but we have a lot of misconceptions a lot of times. Preconceived notions about those who live in RVs, and this is a whole conversation about itself, right? It's a whole video topic, but it's really interesting, starting to go down that rabbit hole and talking about kind of how we experience things and even how we perceive others, even within the RV community, and how we perceive others, now living this way, who live in houses. And kind of what the expectations we have of people. Do we expect more? Do we expect less? Do we expect them to take care of the place? Do we not? Or is it just the type of rig they have, right? Because obviously honestly, we expect a different type of person that rolls up in a Prevost than, somebody that rolls up in a Coleman or, an escape trailer or a Holiday Rambler, something like that. And, or the, 1985 Bounder with smoke billowing out the top, right? So it's quite an interesting thing. And I think some of this is very natural. I think there's not necessarily anything wrong with having preconceived notions, but I also think that it's interesting to challenge some of those ideas, which of course they point out in here. The health impacts of housing insecurity are real. Luann's experience living amid the sights and sounds of uprooting and waiting for her own removal encapsulates the bundle of anxiety, loss, grief, and powerlessness that were rolled into her experience of displacement. And they talk a lot about the insecurity that people are facing, where you have such a high concentration of mobile home parks, specifically, or manufactured housing parks in Texas and Florida. Super high concentration. We've also seen some of that in Arizona and Nevada as well, but you don't often see it in places like Washington, not to the same degree at least. But it's also fascinating, the idea that people do feel very insecure when, even regular housing, even in apartments, especially in apartments, right? You don't own your apartment. And the idea of taking your house, your mobile home, that is not very easy, it's not so mobile, right? It's kind of a whole thing. But you kind of planted on this land that you don't own. And then the company comes in and buys out the place, and then they start raising rents. And it's interesting how that would impact, even me, in that case. But ironically, this is actually kind of what got me into RV living, was the idea that I didn't want to feel insecure anymore. I actually wanted to feel more secure, and I wanted to be, I wanted a place that was all mine. And living tiny has actually allowed that, so it's kind of maybe ironic in a way, but it's actually worked in our favor significantly, and I love that. We are happier now than I'd ever been in any apartment or duplex that I'd ever rented, or even a full-on house. And that might perplex people, thinking about how we don't have a plot of land that we stick our rig on, that's just ours, right? But it doesn't work like that, right? It's about having the home. It's not about having the land for us. And then, of course, it's about having the ability to move, right? I would start to get a little anxious if we couldn't use our trailer and pull it around. Or our bus, for example. It really was quite stressful for us when Lenny the bus had some engine troubles and started expressing some of that to us. And, naturally, because the idea of being mobile and having our own tiny home is wonderful so long as we can be mobile. But being in the same place for an extended period of time, it really starts to get louder and louder and louder each day that, like, hey, this is not your land and you can't be here forever. Don't get too comfortable. And so we're so much more comfortable being on the road. But again, I think that's kind of hard for people to understand, especially those who are just thinking about full timing and they're like, what am I going to do? Where am I going to sleep? And that scares them to not have somewhere to park. Whereas it's kind of the opposite for us. Back to this book, there's something that I found interesting. I've seen these numbers consistently throughout quite a few of these books, but apparently the 70s were a really good time for RVing, very popular time. And so they talk about some of the numbers. I'm trying to be kind of careful here, but you can kind of see this chart here. One of the things that I found interesting throughout all of this is that travel trailers, and they do separate between travel trailers and camping trailers, which camping trailers would be like a little pop-out, more like a canvas tent pop-out part, and then a travel trailer obviously is all hard-sided. And they do count motorhomes and truck campers, and it's interesting because consistently truck campers are among the least popular, but the most popular of any time. I mean, total shipments being 582,900 total units shipped in 1972. You would think, though, that would be a really good year to find a unit for pretty cheap compared to, especially compared to some of today's prices, right? But 250,800 travel trailers with motorhomes, 116,800. So I picture Winnebago being the most popular, like the Chieftain. Being the most popular unit maybe sold. And then, of course, the next is going to be 1973, 528,800 units. But in 1972, of course, you take 582,900, and we're looking at the RVIA's reports. You know, in 2018, we had 483,700, which so even more in 72. 406, 430,000 in 2020, which I think 2020 there's this huge boom as people realize like there was that fear of like, I don't know if we're gonna have a job and this and that, and what, are we all gonna die? And then people just realize like, okay, this is kind of settling down a little bit to everybody needs to separate. And so RVs went crazy, right? And of course we see a quality decrease as well. But in 2021, 600,240 units shipped. 600,000. The year after, 493, then 313, 333, 342,000, you know, significantly less than the 600,000 units. But something about that kind of surprised me that it took, you know, this huge pandemic and a lot of fear for people to get back out and exceed the numbers in the 70s. And as far as I can tell, that like 72 was the peak of RV production up until this point. And I just find that fascinating. And I wonder why that is. I don't know if it was like a different, you know, family value system. And some of these numbers do make sense. And they're obviously the drops are then influenced by all of these, you know, significant events, whether it's the oil crisis in the 70s, and then you have, of course, like a recession. Any recession is going to drop things dramatically. And then COVID, which I think ironically, COVID spikes things. And it's all kind of cyclical in a way, but it's sort of fascinating seeing that. As somebody who I see RV living, when you own your home and if you love it, right, you can make anything that you want, right? But you know, if you paid it off, it's sort of more recession proof. And I love that idea that I own it, it's mine, and then the government obviously can't come and take it away if we don't pay our property taxes or we can't afford our taxes anymore. And some of these big houses, like you're doing well today, but unless you're set up in particular ways, you know, can you afford the tax bill on some of these? And as housing costs continue to rise, and they always will, as we expect, are we going to always be able to afford these things, right? Because we're doing well today, but have we prepared? You know, and a lot of folks have, but there are plenty of folks that haven't. And we've heard of many people who, you know, gentrification happens in their home and they used to be able to afford it, but especially now with retirement or Social Security or whatever, they can't. And so is there a solution? I know some places, though, there are solutions for that in place. With some places, of course, there are tax exemptions or tax increase exemptions for a lot of those places, but not everywhere. And so I think about a lot of this, and you take it all into account, because a lot of this doesn't necessarily affect us on the day-to-day, but it is a whole range of things that we either take for granted or we worry a little too much about or what have you. And I think all in all, this lifestyle is just conducive to that peace of mind that Em and I live with. So. Oh man, it is several hours later, and it's amazing how fast the time flies when you're out here. And I'm just sitting there, you know, reading books and magazines and, you know, trying to ingest what I can, because obviously I'm not going to deep dive on anything in particular, but boy, I get to talking to folks too, and it's a great time here. I'm actually not looking forward to leaving. There's also one gentleman that works here, really nice guy. We've been talking about RVs, building out vans, and actually I think I have him pretty well convinced that the way to go is an old school bus. Because when you're looking at 17 to say 25,000 or so for a used van, likely gonna have 70,000 miles or so, you know, it might actually make more sense, especially because you can pay for them in cash, to buy like a short bus, you know, a little schoolie. especially because you can beat the hell out of those things and they're just fine. But the vans, you know, you're gonna, if you don't have the cash, you're gonna take out a loan, and your fuel economy is not gonna be all that much better, but it's also not going to, you know, it's gonna be a little more limited, let's say, you know, versus a wide body. You're more likely to be able to stand up in the school bus, and short buses are shorter in every dimension, but you can probably stand up in a lot of them. And even if you can't stand up in a short bus, you know, you can still, you know, you're just a little hunched over, and you can still park in a regular parking spot. And you know, if you pick up one for anywhere from $500 to $5,000, especially if you have that in cash, I mean, it makes good sense. It makes. I'm super biased towards buses in general, though. You guys know this. But I don't know. If you find one gently used, now out here they salt the roads, so yeah, rust is the thing. But you can also travel a little bit for one. But I would also, inspection's a nice thing to have. But which buying a newer vehicle is no guarantee of anything, right? But I will say, it behaved beautifully going there, and even better on the way back. I don't know if they did a transmission control reset or something like that, but I mean, they didn't see anything evident. They didn't see any shavings or anything like that, so that's really good. You know, having a warranty is peace of mind, but also, you know, having paid for something in cash is even more peace of mind to me. And so that you have a little extra money if you need repairs, invariably. So, but it's really cool to be able to sit there and chat for hours and hours. I could go on and on and on, and just the nicest folks here. And even one gal who's helping with the organization of the, you know, the whole library. It's so cool. I love it. But no, finding some good stuff, and I love seeing the old advertisements. Old ads are way, way, way better than the new one. You know, getting some ideas for, you know, potential topics. There's a lot of things that I'm like, I don't know that I want to talk about that on our channel, or even if I say what I believe is the right thing, there's always going to be somebody that disagrees, and it's like, yeah, is it worth the, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze, so to speak? Or it doesn't even matter, or do we just live our life? A lot of things like that in life, right? But anywho, we got 2 more days here. Not looking forward to leaving. I might spend a few hours in there tomorrow doing some research. You know, we'll see how that turns out, and yeah, we're hitting the road, and we're heading west, and it is cold today. Hopefully this is about as cold as it gets over the next month or so, but you know, we'll be heading through some plains and windy areas, and the wind chill is always pretty significant. We'll see. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video.